Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to do a brief reflection on reading versus watching TV. And I had a couple of comments lately from different people in different contexts, and they were saying, wow, you seem to read a lot. And I'm like, I always have the sense that I'm not reading as much as I should. And it got me pondering the nature of all of this. And I think it's fascinating. I think I decided that one reason I don't feel like I read as much as I should is when I was in graduate school for there was about a 3-year period where I was reading, this sounds like an exaggeration, but I've checked the numbers before, but somewhere around minimum 1,000, but generally around 2,000 pages a week, because this is what was required to try and keep on pace with the classes and doing research for exams, which I think was the worst. The dissertation actually slowed down considerably, amazingly enough, when I went to write the dissertation, because you could pace it yourself. When you're doing classes and exams, other people are pacing it for you, and they were not particularly sympathetic to how you might want to pace it. They were very interested in how they were pacing it. And so you're 1,000, 2,000 pages a week for years. And so I just got used to the notion that, I should be reading 5 or 6 or 7 hours a day and taking notes and being very focused on that. And then actually when I finished my exams, there was a period where I kind of went reading blind. I couldn't read a cereal box. I could read nothing. Like street signs were invisible to me. I was no longer literate for a while. I just gave up on words because I was so burnt out. But so for me, that pace of reading seems like, that's what I should be doing. Of course, I haven't done anything remotely like that since then. But I do tend to read a couple hours a day and, pacing, I don't know, I can't count pages, particularly now because I'm doing a lot of my reading in French, and that just, does that slow you down? Or at least slows me down. It apparently doesn't slow French people down at all. But for me, it definitely slows me down. So I'm reading about 50-50 or 60-40 French to English with a little more emphasis on the French. So, I'm reading fewer pages now, but I think my time reading is roughly the same. Although, again, I always have the sense that I should be reading more, although I think this is maybe absurd. And then what does this have to do with TV? And I think part of it is people say, again, you read a lot of books. But for me, the reverse is I'm like, wow, people seem to watch a lot of TV. And if you imagine, just take all the time that you've spent watching TV for the last whatever X number of decades and convert that into reading, I think roughly I just default to reading. But I thought they're very, very different media, right? And so I don't want to just say, one is better than the other. I have the habit of reading. I do not have the habit of watching moving video. So I actually tracked my use for a little while, and I went on my computer and my phone to see. And my phone, I just watched no video on my phone, so that was easy. But on my computer, my laptop, I went and looked, and sure enough, I watched about 4.5 hours, give or take, in the preceding 3 weeks each week of moving video, which is almost entirely YouTube. I think 100% YouTube. And when I went and looked at what that amounted to each week, about 1.5 to 2 hours of that was my French teacher is like, no, you need to continually listen to French. And so if I'm in the car, I have the French radio on. I have French radio on in the house sometimes. And then I listen to French history shows or French philosophers being interviewed and stuff on YouTube, which is amazing. What a great resource that is. But I don't watch it. I usually take notes or something while I'm doing that. So I even though that is a video, it's on YouTube, I'm functionally just listening. I don't actually watch it. What I actually watch is football. So embarrassingly, like 90% of my if it's a moving image and I'm watching it, it's almost entirely football. Like it's embarrassing. But there it is. True enough, the one thing I can apparently watch is football. So, so full confession there. And so, I functionally, I watch about 2 or 3 hours a week of football. And that's my video consumption for, a week. I don't have TVs or anything like that. So I don't have any other moving screens in my life. What does this have to do with versus reading? And to me, it just got me pondering on the nature of the different media, like how they impact you, what the interaction is, and all these kinds of things. And reading is primarily, although you can read aloud to people, and I do this occasionally, it's pretty, let's be clear, that's pretty rare. However, in the history of literacy, it used to be really common. Like newspapers would print serial stories like Dickens, Dostoevsky, both of these great writers from history did this. But the point was that people could buy newspapers relatively cheaply, and they could read them aloud to other people. So it was the audiobook, the early form of the audiobook, basically, because lots of people couldn't read, but they loved the stories. And so this is one big change that's happened over the years. We don't do this very much. So now in the contemporary world, reading is almost entirely a solitary activity. And so you think about that and you go, wow, what this means is I spend a lot of time quietly reading by myself, although I do read in the coffee shop. So I read almost every day. I read in the coffee shop that I go to. Again, I'm reading the history of the Fifth Republic. It's a 1,000-page history of the French Republic, which is more than anybody needs. But I'm making slow progress in it, learning things about history and working on my French. So I do that every day in the coffee shop, give or take. So that's kind of a communal environment. But basically, I'm by myself reading on my own, and I think it's a fair question to say, hey, is that healthy? Is it good to do that? For me, I love it. But I can see why people go, I don't want to sit by myself quietly for hours. That doesn't sound interesting at all. I would rather be with people. And one of the advantages I would think video has potentially is it can be communal. You can watch shows or watch movies or watch even football games, by the way, with other people. Like you can do it with them and have a kind of a shared experience. So I'm like, okay, I get that. I see that as definitely a tension. Although I do see people watching a lot of TV on their own, which I always find a little disturbing. And even more than that, it turns out that particularly old people who are on their own watch, it's terrifying, but it's clearly an attempt to salve loneliness. And so you get the voice, you get the moving images. It's like people are around, but it's not really the same. But so that is one where I really see the tension of going, yeah, it'd probably be better to be more communal. But the communal aspects of video, I think are actually like, I don't have a sense, and I couldn't find any good number on this, so maybe somebody could in the comments put something where you could find this out, of how people are spending their time. Are they on their own or are they with other people? But given that so much time is spent watching on like laptops and pads and on, people actually watch video on their phone, which just completely defeats me. I don't understand this at all. I'm not really want a big TV, but I understand the wall-sized TV, watch movie, watch football game. I'm like, okay, it seems ridiculously intrusive to me, but I get it. Like, okay, it's a big picture, it's big and moving, nice. But wow, like watching it on your phone, no, that seems insane to me. People do this, which means that I think a lot of our video viewing has moved to actually being private. So it reproduces what I think is maybe the biggest often concern I have about reading so much, which is just being alone all the time, being by yourself. So that communal versus potentially individual or isolated versus community aspect, I think, is complicated by the increasingly isolated pattern of video watching that has developed in the modern world, in large part because of the way technology is deployed. Another aspect of this, and this is one where really, to me, seems apt, is reading is very active, actually. In fact, you can look up the studies on this one. There's been a lot of them, obviously. It burns a lot of calories. It actually wears people. It is tiring, even for me, someone who's, I'm used to reading. I'm good at reading. I think this is one of the things that's happening with the French is like, I'm just not a very good French reader. And so it's exhausting to me, like when my students were reading and I'm like, hey, just read these 400 pages. And it's no problem for them because they're not as good a reader as I am. It was a much more of a challenge, the way it is for a challenge of me to read in French, right? It's like, oh yeah, God, now I'm really tired, right? It's wearing me out. I can feel the energy that I'm using to do this. Like reading is work. And so it's an active. It looks passive. You're sitting still, but it's a mentally very, very active, engaging process that requires you to do a fair amount of work. And what I notice with video and many of the video environments, not all of it, is video is made to be, it's not an inadvertent thing, it's made to be easy, it's made to be simple, particularly now that we watch in digital formats of streaming where you can just click instantly and change and move over. So like apparently this is what TikTok is, just that's the end, this all ends up at TikTok where you just have 5 seconds of, oh, that's crazy, and then that's crazy, and then that's crazy, and we're sort of, grasshoppers or bugs of some kind that just respond to this endless sequence of spiky stimulus. But it's designed to be easy. It's designed for you to be passive. It does the work for you. It manipulates you. It just keeps it so that you don't get frustrated or unhappy or whatever, and then you change, and then you decide to shift or you decide to move. And again, the one media I do watch is football, and so it's always hilarious to me when a football game has gone wrong. And so like one team is up 40-0 and halfway through the third quarter, and the announcers are beside themselves because there's no mystery left, right? Everybody knows what's going to happen. And so it's like, and they're desperate for you not to change the channel. It would be as if a movie like halfway through said, oh, well, this is that guy there. He's the murderer and we're done. And so the next hour we're just going to, hang out in the coffee shop and chat, right? People are like, wait, what? No, the plot's done? The plot's over. Wait, why am I still watching this? Like, this is stupid. And the announcers are perfectly aware of this. And they're like desperately trying to tell you why you should keep watching when you absolutely should not keep watching unless you're absurdly addicted to the sport like I am. So the media is designed to be facile, for you not to work, for you to be functionally anesthetized by it, because this then keeps you watching. And a comparison is, this was Stanley Kubrick talked about this with 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he says that movie only worked because he had a captive audience in a theater. And once you've gone to a movie, paid for ticket price, and sat down, for you to leave takes a lot. And so it's unbelievably slow. There's crazy passages. There's where you do not know what's going on. He's trying to disorient you. He's trying to change your sense of time. He's trying to work on all of this, but it really frustrates audiences. I mean, it's a classic, but it was a classic that really frustrated audiences, but that was part of what made it great. And it's extraordinarily difficult to reproduce that in an environment where somebody goes, oh, this is boring in 5 minutes. Like, click. Nobody's blown up in 1 second, so I'm going to go click. Click, 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 click. And so a facile media that actually actively works against you having to do anything is a very different experience from a media where you are necessarily actively engaged. And I often think that when people say, oh, I have a hard time reading, or I have a hard time getting into a book, or these kinds of things, what it is there is this barrier to participation, which is you have to get relaxed, you have to get your mind right, you have to have something to read, and now you need to engage in it and focus on it and really let the rest of the world go. And that process in our modern world, where we have an infinite opportunity to be endlessly distracted, is actually difficult to achieve. And so both what we read and the way we read has changed dramatically. And there's all kinds of studies on this and all that. But the basic underlying process is the same. Oh, and again, it's more akin to going to a movie theater in a weird way, because when you buy a book, you've spent some money, and books are actually still fairly expensive. Like I bought, a paperback the other day, and I think it was $18. And I'm like, that's a fair amount of money for a book. So now I'm invested. I want this book to be good, and I'm going to spend some time with it because it's expensive. And what we think of is, oh, I just pay for, say, a streaming fee, one streaming service, which is probably $18 a month. So I go, wow, I can watch for a month for the same price as one book. Well, that's silly. But now look at the incentives. Like, well, I've already paid for it, so I may as well watch something. or, oh, this isn't very good, but oh, well, I'll finish watching it anyway because why not? And right, so the incentives are very different. Whereas, like, oh no, I'm invested in this and I'm hoping for it to be a good experience. I need it to be a good experience for me to get like the energy and time and money and effort that I've gone to go to the store and pick out a book. And I've heard about this author and now let's go. Like, okay, I'm going to give this a good solid, 100 pages. There's very few books I've abandoned under, 50 pages. That's really rare. I mean, it has to be an extraordinarily terrible book for me to just chuck it out after 50 pages. There's many books I've read to the end that I absolutely should not have, that I should have abandoned earlier, but it is the sort of sunk cost fallacy. Like, well, I'm 80 pages in, fine. Like, why not? But I'm sure we've all done that. We've all watched, movies that were like, why am I watching this? And then you watch at the end. I'm sure people do that. Again, football games. Why am I still watching this game? This game was over an hour ago. But again, it changes all of the incentives. And it strangely, for me at least, and I think for other people I've talked to about this, when you invest in something like this, the only way to get a return is to have that kind of investment. So one of my friends and neighbors here in France, she's a huge movie person. She loves movies. She goes to movies all the time. She goes to film festivals. But every time she watches a movie, she comes home and writes an analysis of it. So she sits down and she's, how was the acting? How was the sets? How was the designs? How was the lighting? What was the plotting? What was the overall impact? Right? She writes a full, multi-page analysis and reflection on every film that she goes to. So she says, one, it slows her down, right? She can only watch so many films because it's actually, she needs to do this work after it. And two, it transforms this going to the film into a completely different experience, right? Because it becomes much richer. Now you're doing work again. And now you want to go to a film that gives you something to write about, right? You don't want to just say, well, that was stupid and poorly done. This is no fun for you. So we've had some interesting conversation. By the way, she's also she's one of the most literate people I've ever met in my life. Wow, is she literate. So she doesn't just like movies, she also likes books. But this conceptual difference is to say, when I return to it, this to me is the biggest single difference. When you're reading, you're actually burning energy, you're investing. It is kind of work, and you're spending quiet time alone in your own mind with kind of a guest, and that guest is this book. So it's a very different process. When much of the media that we pay attention to now, by statistically, is structured very differently. You're not talking to an author in your head. You're not listening to a voice in your head. It's been mediated through actors and writers and producers and directors, and it's a much more mediated medium. And so it's not that there aren't great films or great TV shows or whatever, but it is just it's extraordinarily different, that asks in general less of you. But it's not a necessary difference. I think it's an inherent difference of how we interact with it. So I would suggest for people who watch a lot of TV, which is fine. Like I said, whatever people do, that's them. But try this engaging on a different level. Create a worksheet or create an outline and say, okay, if I'm going to watch a show or a series or a movie, then afterwards, what I'm going to do is I want to write this outline. What did I like about it? How was the acting? Where did I think it was falling down? What was right? And it will create this engagement with the media that, in theory, will make it more enjoyable, more enriching, and more powerful, in part simply because you're more active. You're more of a participant. You're more of someone who's in there and actually having the experience with the media. And it will also change the way you watch film. But I should put a safety note out there, because I used to teach a class called Art of Film, which is hilarious because I always told my students, you've all seen 100 times more movies than I have. So interesting experience. We watched in different ways. But I would tell them hey, look, what's going to happen when you start filling out all of these worksheets that I would give them about what's a good way to approach this and to think about film and video in general, it will alter the way you see everything that you watch. And sometimes I think our resistance to doing this is from this fear or like secret awareness that if you really start paying attention to what you watch, it will be very much less good. And that's what students would continually complain to me, like, oh, you're ruining movies for me. And it's like, no, you're just actually starting to pay attention to your own ideas. You're ruining the movies for you. Like, you're becoming an active participant. And when you're an active participant in something, you want very different kinds of experiences than when you're trying to be completely passive. And that is the great distinction, I guess, I'm driving towards here in my own awkward and slow fashion, is the activity level versus the passivity level. And, sometimes it's great to just be passive and relax, and that's great. But as a general rule, I want to be active. I want to be a participant. I want to be growing and changing and exploring. Obviously, this is who I am. And I think it's just a very different way to engage in the media. So people, if you are watching a fair amount of video content, like I said, which is fine. I know a lot of people who love film history and shows and all this. It's like, great, make it an active undertaking. It'd still be very different from reading, but it is nonetheless a completely different dynamic when you start engaging actively as opposed to just being an endless consumer. And, by the way, a spoiler alert, I have a new series that's coming up that's going to talk about that kind of movement. So maybe that's also why it's in my mind is the passivity versus the activity, consumption versus participation and creation is very much prominently on my mind. And when you read, you are in fact creating an imaginary world or imaginary conversations. Or, when you look at a blank page, when you look at a page with words on it, you realize how much work the human imagination has to do to create worlds and ideas and histories and images and emotions out of this text. And what an extraordinary piece of magic it is that that's even possible. And how much of our imaginations are taken out of the equation when you watch film. You don't need to wonder what color something is. They're going to show you what color. You don't need to wonder what the character sounds like. You don't have to fill that in. The sound fills that in. The music manipulates your emotions. The way the film is cut manipulates your emotion and attention. Right? Like all of these elements are controlled in video. And so the passivity level is just very much higher. There's just less work for you to do, less opportunity for you to participate. And so I tend to encourage people to look for places where they can participate, where they can express themselves, where they can actually make a difference. And as an extended note on this, one of the things I think is interesting in my little French town here, village in the rural France, bizarrely, and I guess shows how out of touch I am with the world, but a game store opened up, an actual physical people play games with people store, like has card games and board games and all kinds of crazy games. And I'm like, how is that possible? So then I did a little research, and it turns out that actual in-person physical gaming is really booming right now because people feel, apparently, and I think the statistics would say accurately, like they are distracted, not participating with people, isolated, and that when you play a game with somebody, you sit down, you're paying attention, you're doing something real in the physical world, and it's participatory and creative and all of those wonderful things that go along with that. And I'm like, wow, there's so much demand for this that someone can actually open up a game store in rural France. I mean, this is, to me, this is just bizarre land. But when I was a kid, before the computer revolution, people played games all the time. There's the whole history of bridge as a big activity, but it's because people were playing games together because it was fun and interactive. And that tradition slowly got replaced by either video games or TV or other, again, passive. So when you're playing games with people, It's active, and again, it reintroduces this element of imagination because many games, like I wouldn't say all games, but many of the games I'm familiar with, actually invite you or necessitate you to like, imagine you're participating in some slightly alternative world to play the game. And so you have like a group imagination project going on in which people get to sort of create and be creative and, be vocal and spend time with other people. And then it's back to the social thing. And so I don't know. I just find that fascinating that has come back to this strongly and so much to the fore. But I think part of it is we've gone so far down the passivity route and so far down the isolation route that people are now actively of necessity for like health and survival purposes, seeking out things that force them to be present and physical and with other people and being active and creative rather than, again, passive and isolated in that sense. So just a quick reflection on reading versus television. But for me, like I said, if you just imagine all of the time that you've spent watching TV, subtract a couple of football games, and hey presto, that's how much time probably I spend reading. It's just what I do with my time because I love to do it. And even though I do read a fair amount, I always feel like I should read more. And there's always more things that need reading. So it's an interesting concept for me because I seem to have gone out of step with the culture, and somehow I feel like now I'm becoming more in step with the culture again. So who knows? Things change. The times, the zeitgeist transforms in strange and unpredictable ways. So, reading versus TV. Thank you very much.